You're listening to American Grit, America's raw and uncensored podcast. My name's Tim Jensen. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, entrepreneur, and co-owner of Grunt Style Apparel. And we're here to talk about all the bullshit mainstream media won't touch with a stick by sharing information that directly impacts our community, our well-being, and our destiny as Americans. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of American Grit with me, Tim Jensen. And I have a very special guest with us today as we continue our conversation about military sexual trauma and the reforms that are needed within our military to make sure that we are providing a safe environment for all of our enlisted personnel. So I'd like to welcome to the show Colonel Don Christensen, U.S. Air Force, former JAG officer, and spent a majority of your career prosecuting military sexual traumas. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Tim. Really great to be here. I'm really impressed that you're taking on this topic.
Right on. It is definitely a hard topic to talk about, right? It is uncomfortable. It is shameful in many circumstances in which the behaviors that are being exhibited upon both men and women within our military. We got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we do have a lot of work to do. The military has been struggling with this for at least the last 30 years, starting with the tailhook scandal in the early 90s. Decades of promise from senior leadership that they were going to control this, but what we know is that instead of getting better, the problem's getting worse. The most recent data was the highest rate of sexual assault ever recorded in the United States military. So we have a long ways to go to make sure our men and women feel safe when they're serving. Right.
And as I understand it, with that data that's coming out, there are less prosecutions that are happening in the military now, but the amount of military sexual assaults are increasing.
Yeah, absolutely right. So the DOD is required by Congress to do a really in-depth look at the sexual assault problem. And every other year they do a survey of the force to get an idea of how many men and women on active duty were sexually assaulted. And they've been doing that since 2006. And the numbers that just came out were the highest ever. So, excuse me. So 8.4% of women were sexually assaulted or raped or had some other wrongful sexual contact in fiscal year 21. That is 50% increase in the rate of sexual assault from 2018. So the numbers are going the wrong way. And then we look at prosecutions. It's doing exactly opposite. While we're seeing sexual assault and reporting go up, we're seeing prosecutions go down and convictions go down.
Yeah.
So we are doing exactly the opposite of what we need.
Right. And, it's very easy, and I hear this all the time, well, it's only 10%, right? I mean, there's a lot of women in the military. Well, 10%, I don't care if it's 1%.
Yeah.
Right? This is a big problem, and it's not only happening amongst women, right? This is happening against males as well, and it's mostly, happening from a predatory leadership position. Would you disagree with that?
Well, a lot of it in the sexual assault world is predatory leadership positions. We know, especially with sexual harassment, a lot of that comes from leadership. And what's particularly troubling about that is, from again the DOD's own numbers, if you have a unit that has a sexual harassment problem, a woman in that unit has a 1 in 4 chance of being sexually assaulted. So leadership's failures is a real problem.
Yeah. And, we've had some really great conversations, coming up to this podcast. And, you spent 23 years prosecuting this. What were some of the things that, you observed and the takeaways of over those years, seeing the problem firsthand, seeing how commands are dealing with it, and what programs exist that are really there, like SHARPS. Is SHARPS really effective? It doesn't seem like it is.
Right. Well, I would say over the 23 years, and some of that I spent as defense counsel. So I've seen this from both sides, and I was also a military judge, so I've really seen it from every way you can look at it. And one of the big takeaways is we have a culture of disbelief in the military. Mm-hmm. And what do I mean by that? There is a denial both in leadership and the rank and file that this is really a problem. So when I talk about the numbers, 36,000 men and women being sexually assaulted last year, these aren't my numbers. These are the Department of Defense's numbers. They've been doing this survey for, like I said, since 2006, scientifically valid, but no one really accepts that there's this big of a problem. Yeah. So as you prosecute the cases, what you see is, and I think part of this is that team centered focus we have in the military is that people rally around the offender. And so when you are at a court martial, you'll see behind the accused all of his teammates, and then the victim is shunned out of the unit. That makes it really difficult to, one, win these cases, and two, get men and women willing to go through this gauntlet of support that the accused has. And it's also at the leadership level, just a disbelief. So if you look at currently, commanders are the one who make prosecution decisions ultimately. And if you look at the last 6 years, only about 6% of the cases where someone comes forward and says, I've been sexually assaulted or raped, and it's investigated, only about 6% of those ever make it into court. Yeah. And only about 2% of those result in a conviction. So for an offender, they know that they have a 98% chance that nothing's going to happen to them.
Right. So it's creating this or cultivating rather, this behavior within the ranks. And there's something very interesting, that I think I want to pick at a little bit here is, you're talking about when in the prosecution or in the courtroom itself during these proceedings. You're absolutely right. You do see the group rally behind the individual that is the accused. Right, and the victim is often shamed. Right. I think of Janae Sergio and the conversation that we had with her, and the fallout of that. In that, after it's all said and done, they put the individual that violated her back in the same classroom, and as if nothing ever happened. Right. What the fuck are we doing in our military services that we're allowing these things to happen?
Yeah, and it's frustrating because there are congressionally mandated things out there to make sure that doesn't happen, but it's still happening, where the rapist and the victim are still in the same dorm even after reported, and before he goes to trial, they don't separate them. We have commanders that are reluctant to give no contact orders or military protective orders. And it is just, again, that mindset that we have. I'm 100% behind innocent until proven guilty. But that doesn't mean you ignore the fact that you have evidence this person has committed a crime, and you have to at least address that before you go to trial.
Right.
The Army had a case where the guy had committed 5 rapes before they finally put him into pretrial confinement. And they knew about these, and they ignored it for the first few times it was brought forward. So you got to change that mindset that that we rally around them. And a lot of it is that teammate thing. And I understand that. I was in for 23 years. And that's a great strength of the military is this camaraderie we have. But you also have to remember your ultimate loyalty is to the institution.
Right.
And the institution has been harmed. One of its members has been sexually assaulted. And that's what you need to be looking at.
Yeah. And in the conversations, we've talked about, just how the legal system within the United States military operates, right? It was only recently, within the last half century, that we have transitioned out of one style of law into the current style that we are in. Could you elaborate that? Because I think it's important to understand that.
Right. So the American military justice system was based on King George III's justice system that George Washington adopted in 1775. And it was not a fair process, and it was incredibly abusive to soldiers, particularly the enlisted rank. It allowed a commander that had the authority to convene a court to reject verdicts. Just think about that. That just blows our mind is that somebody could say, "Oh, you've been found now guilty. Now keep deliberating." Yeah. I don't like that. Commanders had almost unfettered power. The convictions are basically automatic. People were sentenced, and what was crazy, there wasn't a judge presiding over this case. There wasn't an appellate court. It wasn't until 1951 that we had appellate courts in the military justice system. It wasn't until 1969 that we had judges. So just lay people, lay officers, ruled on evidentiary issues. The court members, the jury, decided whether something was hearsay or not, without any legal training. So because of all of this abuse, Congress after World War II started putting more protections in. But it was protections in the military that was basically 99% male and really wasn't thinking about sexual assault. And so what we've seen is a lot of those protections designed to push back against command abuse have given a shield to offenders to be protected from being prosecuted and given them greater access to like mental health records than they would in the civilian world of the victim. And that's a real disincentivizer for someone to come forward when they know that their mental health records are going to be turned over to their offender. So it was an abusive process, and it still has a lot of issues, but it is better than it was for the first 200 years.
Right, right. And, and I think there are still problems, right? And there's still abuses that are occurring, majorly in the enlisted side, right? Officers still get a lot of passes, right?
Yep.
I remember, and I spoke about this previously, and I think I shared this with you. When I walked off the plane in Camp Liberty, Iraq, right in BIOP, this is 2004. I was in the holding area for maybe a couple days, just getting acclimated, and it's like a week in the holding areas before you move on to your next place, and as you find your home, and during that time period, it was September 2004, and there was a prostitution ring that was being run by a major, and most of the prostitutes were officers, like this is happening within our military, and that was almost 20 years ago.
Right.
Right. But I would venture to say that these things are still happening today, right? As we, look at, the cases like Vanessa Guillen, as we look at, probably, what's happening with Denisha Roberts, what is happening there?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great question. That family's struggling because they can't get answers and don't have faith in the system. And when you don't have faith in the system, you can't get people to come in and join. But what I would say is you may or may not have heard the term different spanks or different ranks. And that whole idea that the more senior you are, the less likely you are to be punished. And it's reality. I saw it when I was on active duty. The head of the Air Force Judge Advocate General Department was involved in a very widespread unprofessional relationship with about 13 subordinates, including an allegation of sexual assault. If he had been an E4, he would have been prosecuted. But because he was a two-star general, he was allowed to retire and lose some rank. Okay,
Right.
but he's still making more money in retirement than we are.
Right, full bennies,
Yeah,
everything. Right?
exactly. And the Air Force has been around for 75 years, and they've had a number of generals who have failed to meet the standards and committed criminal misconduct. Some of it's serious criminal misconduct. It wasn't until this year that they actually ever prosecuted a general officer. And that's what's wrong with this process is that for the enlisted people, they see generals, they see colonels, they see majors getting away with crimes that they get crushed for. And to have a justice system, everybody has to be equal under the law.
Yeah, 100%. Now, when we talk about recruiting, right? Let's talk about our current recruiting processes now. Do you feel that there are opportunities that we can there's a lot of predators that come into the military, right?
Right.
Let's think about the demographics that are coming into the military, right? And and I want to preface this, by saying that we're not attacking the military here, right? We're trying to improve our community. We're trying to hold our peers accountable to the actions of what we discern as the standard, right?
Right.
But with that being said, can we do a better job of looking at the demographics and saying, hey, we need to be screening a little bit better in these regards. Sure, they're doing all the checking the boxes, like, oh, do you have a criminal history, blah 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 blah, right? But are there other opportunities that we can get in front of that you have seen or that you've even ideated over your course of your career? Yeah.
Well, first let me just say I agree 100%. This is very pro-military. I mean, I did 23 and a half years. I'm third generation Air Force officer. I'm fifth, sixth generation military. Loved the military, loved the Air Force, loved being in it. So I want it to be in a better place, and I know it can be. But you're right. Yeah. How do we look at that? And I'm not a psychologist. I don't know the best way to do a test on that. But I know one thing we can look at is social media. The recruiters, I know they're busy. but are they looking at social media recruiters, the recruitees? Because it tells you a lot. You know, are we seeing comments that they make in that social media that's racist, misogynist, that tells you this is somebody that even though we are having a hard time recruiting, maybe we just don't want to have this person in here. You know, it's kind of interesting is, I don't know if you've been watching like the Dahmer series, and there's another series called Mind Hunters about looking at serial killers. How many of those people, like Jeffrey Dahmer was in the Army, how many, David Berkowitz, son of Sam, was in the Army, how many of these people were in the military? And a lot of them not because they were drafted, because they enlisted, or were in the Marines, or in the Air Force. And so it is something there that we're missing, that we're bringing people in like that.
Yeah,
But
and that's a great point. Like, I think of myself, right? I come from a broken home, right? I joined the Marine Corps because I had no other options, right? I could have went to college, but I probably would have ended up in jail because of the lifestyle that I was living, right? And I think that's predominantly the people that the military attracts, right?
Right.
You know, and you know, with that comes luggage, right? You know, and again, I'll use myself, and I don't mind putting myself out there. But you know, I came from a broken home. I didn't have a good male role model in my life. I was involved in crime. I was involved in drugs. I was involved in all these other things, but I still made it into the military.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
but if the standards of the military were is what they said, I should not have been able to join the military.
Right. Right. Yeah. And, you know, and the Army in particular reduced their standards in the buildup in Iraq in 2005, 2006, bringing in people with felony convictions. You know, there's not a lot of good data out there for us to trail those people, to track them, to see what kind of problems they caused. You know, I believe in second chances. You know, as a judge, I really believed in second chances. I think it's really important in our country to give people second chances. So I wouldn't want barriers to say, you just can't overcome that.
Right.
But we still need to look at the mentality of the people. And again, because I'm not a psychologist, I can't tell you the best way to do that.
Right.
But it's something we should be looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, because you know, and I think that's a great point. Is, you know, definitely looking at it, understanding how to, you know, what type of psychological test can we put into in that pre-period, right?
Right.
You know, they put so much focus on the ASVAB. Yeah. You know, the ASVAB is great. Is it?
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you what my GT score has done for me. But anyways, you know, I think it's you know, having, you know, creating some processes there, and you know, and again, as we source from these demographics, right? We know that we're getting a lot with those demographics. You know. Sexual trauma is a huge thing in the United States.
It is.
Right? Especially, you know, 80s, 90s, you know, that's a big problem.
Absolutely. You know, and part of that was culture.
Yeah.
You know, I'm old. You're not old, but I'm old. But I remember, you know, the movies that we would see in the 70s and 80s particularly. So, for example, Animal House, huge classic. In Animal House, we got people laughing about having sex with an underage passed out woman. That's comedy, you know, but that's actually a very serious crime, but it was a comedic bit. All the movies in the 80s, you know, was all about getting the girl, and if she was drunk and she was out, fine, you know, 16 candles.
Right.
Here's my passed out girlfriend, have at her.
Right.
So
all 20-year-olds playing 14-year-olds.
All 20-year-olds playing 14-year-olds, yeah. So there was that culture issue. I think we're in a better place when it comes to that, I hope. My hope is that the men and women are coming, even though we're talking about we have some problems with people coming in, that I think they are in a better thought process about how you treat each other than what we were in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, you know, I think, you know, sometimes it gets a bad rap, right? Oh, the military's getting woke, and, you know, military's this, that, and the other. Like, okay, whatever. But, you know, let's talk about the human aspect here, right? You know, there's still humanity. There's still, you know, these core beliefs that we need to be addressing. You know, because if we want the best warfighter, because ultimately that's what we need. We need the best warfighter. We need that person to be so damn focused that they can push the world out of their mind and focus on the objectives in front of them. And we need sound mind, and we need professionals, to be doing that. And I think it's part of our responsibility and that standard to be met as we're recruiting into the military. And then the programs in between, right? We talked a little bit about sharps, right?
Yeah.
When the Vanessa Guillen situation was going on, Tammy Duckworth. I was living in Illinois at the time. Well, no, I wasn't. But we have a business, or half our business is up in Illinois, and she's a representative of the state of Illinois. And she came out and said, "Well, we need to do a better job with our sharps training." I'm like, "Sharps training?" A woman was. I hate to say this, but let's talk about the severity of the situation here. A woman was chopped up into pieces inside of her place of work.
Yep.
There's nothing that sharps is going to do to correct that problem.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the problems we've had is as there's been a push to reform the military justice system, leadership has been very jealously guarding their authority, and they have said, well, we'll just do a better job of training. I don't know how often you have to tell somebody rape's bad. I think everybody gets that. And there are a lot of great people in SHARP, and the Air Force call it SARC, Sexual Assault Response Coordinators. They do a lot of training. There's training fatigue. Mm-hmm. People are just tired of being told this. They're like, I'm not a rapist. Why are you telling me not to do this? So you're not going to train your way out of it. There's a way to change the culture that goes beyond a slideshow, PowerPoint slideshow. And a lot of that comes from leadership. If leadership sends a message that a value that a woman brings to the unit is that I think she's hot, I want to date her, I'm going to try to have sex with her, I'm going to sexually harass her, that tells everybody else in the unit, yeah, that's what her value is. It isn't the fact that she's meeting the same standards we are. Mm-hmm. It isn't the fact that she can handle a machine gun. That's not what's important. What's important is she's cute. Right. And all of that falls on leadership. And it goes back to not holding leadership accountable. We have a number of senior officers who have engaged in inappropriate relationships with junior enlisted, and they're not prosecuted. They need to be prosecuted as a crime under the UCMJ. The Fat Leonard scandal involving the United States Navy, where you had all these senior naval officers trading national security information to Fat Leonard in exchange for prostitutes. That what, again, says to every sailor that knows about that a woman's value is as a sexual object. And you just got to change that mentality.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, General Petraeus.
General Petraeus, absolutely. Right. And and at least he was prosecuted, although he got a slap on the wrist. Right. But he was prosecuted by the Department of Justice. Army didn't prosecute him. Mm-hmm.
Yep, and he walked away with all of his bennies.
All of his benefits.
As you talk, as any other person that's like, of understanding of SSI and clearances and things of that nature, it's like,
yeah, exactly.
What are we doing here? Why am I being held to a different standard?
Yeah. I mean, I have known mid-grade enlisted people who accidentally leave classified on their desk. Shouldn't be doing it. It's bad. They get crushed. General Petraeus is, for sexual favors, giving classified.
Gosh. Like, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem.
Exactly, yeah.
So, we were talking a little bit before the show, too, is like, part of that problem is in the military, we're often looked at as, objects, as, right. That dehumanized, mentality of, you're as a Marine, right, it was beat into us. Like your job is to go out there and fight, and if you die, you die. The next Marine will step in your place and continue to go. So you're like, okay, I'm just an object. I know what my place is. I need to, I'm going to go do this. And with that dehumanization, it allows these things to happen, right? Because now we no longer have any compassion, right? We no longer care about these things that we normally would put a lot of value to, right? In our moral compass and in the things that, that we hold true to ourselves. How do we fix that?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. If you look at the data, the Air Force has the lowest sexual assault rate by far of the 4 services. I guess if you want to call Space Force 5 services now. The Marines have the highest. And I would say of any of that's the two extremes of how people are treated within those services, dehumanized in the Marine Corps, more humanized in the Air Force. And I think there's something to what you're saying. But, when we train our soldiers, one thing we always want to stress, and hopefully are stressing, is that you fight ethically.
Yeah.
We can't have another My Lai, where 500 Vietnamese civilians were slaughtered by soldiers. If we can train people to fight ethically, we can also train them, even though you're a warrior, that does not mean you have a right to rape.
Yeah.
You don't have a right to sexual assault. Your teammate, or what we often don't talk about, is the thousands of civilians that are sexually assaulted by military members.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Your job is to protect them. And that protection doesn't just happen on the battlefield. It means you don't abuse them.
Yeah.
And so it's really just changing the mindset.
Yeah.
We want you to be a warrior, but we want you to be an ethical warrior.
Yeah. And man, that brought back just a memory right now that just is throwing some goosebumps on me. And, I don't think I've ever, talked about this with a lot of people, but, when I was in Iraq, we did a lot of great work, right? Like all of us did. And we were out there doing the right thing, what we believed to be the right thing at that time. And that work had a lot of interfacing with the public, the privateer, the private citizen. And, we did a lot of work in the Triangle of Death. It was Mahmudiya, Yusufiyya, Latifiyya. Inside Yusufiyya was the Al-Janabi family, right? And the Al-Janabi family was, a little history lesson here, was the hit teams of the tribe. That tribe was used by the Ba'ath Party and members of Saddam's inner circle as hitmen and assassins, and really did some disgusting things. So one of our jobs when we were over there was to really quell that tribe down, them and the Garhulis, which were the financiers. They lived across the Euphrates. We did a lot of good work there. We turned that from a black zone to relatively a green zone. And by working with all of those people and showing them the goodwill of the American, right? And all the positive things that we do as a country and how we look at people. When we ripped out, an Army unit came right in behind us, right? Don't know, exactly how long they've been in country and what they've exposed to, the level of combat and loss that they were all going through. But there were some significant fucking problems that they were exhibiting into the local population there, to the point where they raped a 14-year-old Janabi girl, right? And all that work that we did, gone, instant, because of two Army soldiers that couldn't control themselves. And, their command allowed that shit to happen, which ultimately led to the Janabis, going a full-out assault on the Army and then killing a bunch of soldiers and leaving them at a power plant, IED'd, and that was a horrible ending to that story.
Yeah.
But that's just one instance. I'm sure there's more of that, throughout the 20-year war.
Exactly, yeah. Abu Ghraib, war crimes, is the definition of an unethical warrior. And we see the effect of that. It results in additional violence, results in all the work that you put into getting a better situation just evaporating. And that's why it's so important. And you can say by analogy, that's what happens with sexual assault in a unit. If you have a sexual assault in a unit, all the good work of Sharp or the leader that's a good leader just evaporates with that sexual assault because somebody was unethical.
Yeah, it's quite challenging. It's quite challenging. So as you the learnings that you have come out of with your time in the prosecuting, defense, and in the judiciary of all of this, what is the one takeaway that you have that you would want to share with everybody that is listening?
How important it is for all of the services to take to heart the value of experience. Experience is what makes the difference between winning and losing cases. It makes the difference between a survivor, victim, however you want to phrase that, feeling like that they got their day in court, even if it results in an acquittal. It gives the family of the accused a better feeling if they know that their defense attorney's experience, if they can see it, look at the judge and tell that judge has been on the bench, understands the law, and is being fair. That gives everybody on both sides a better belief in the system. But experience is not valued, as crazy as it is, by JAG Corps leadership across the board. So the Air Force, for example, that's what I know the best. You prosecute your first or second assignment, and then you almost never see the court again. The 99% of JAGs will never do a trial after they become a major. The problem is that it takes a long time to be good at prosecuting sexual assault cases. But we put people into those positions that maybe are at the 4-year point of their career, and they've never prosecuted a sexual assault case before, and now they're considered the lead prosecutor on these. They have never cross-examined an accused, but now you're the lead prosecutor. Never made a closing argument before a jury, but now you're the lead prosecutor. It results in legal errors, it results in tactical errors, and what we see is the conviction rates are dismal. So we already talked about very few cases go to trial. Over that last 6 year period, 6.2% of cases, all allegations went to trial, only 6.2%. But the military loses 70% of those few cases they take to trial. So if you can't put people in confinement, if you can't hold them accountable, you're just sending the wrong message. And for the survivor who goes through what it can be a 2-3 year period of having their life turned upside down just to see their offender walk out high-fiving everybody from the unit because I was found not guilty, it's devastating for them. Disincentivizes other survivors to go through the process. So we really need to get the experience in there, and that includes our judiciary. We rotate judges in and out like that. A lot of them have very little experience. And now I will say we have a lot of great judges. We have a lot of great prosecutors. We have a lot of great defense counsel. But what we don't have is a commitment by the leadership to let people do that as a career. So, for example, when I was on active duty, we visited the Boulder, Colorado DA's office because they have kind of a reputation of being a really good prosecution team. And, we're talking with them, we're talking to the district attorney, we're talking to the people heading up the Special Victims Prosecutor Unit, and these people have been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years straight, whereas the average sex assault prosecutor in the Air Force has 2 or 3 years as a lead prosecutor, and then they'll never do it again. Right. And so we just have to change that mentality. The other part of it is that gets lost is the same thing applies to investigators. You mentioned Vanessa Guillen. The Fort Hood report that was done after Vanessa Guillen's murder was just devastating. The Army should have been like, oh my God, we are so embarrassed, but they pushed back. And so what was really particularly bad about it is they looked at the experience level of the investigators at Fort Hood. Highly, highly inexperienced. Not allowed to stay in those jobs. And I think the epitome of that was that the lead investigator of Vanessa Guillen's murder was PCS'd during the investigation. Now, if you're taking this seriously, you say, hey, we're going to hold off on his move until this investigation is done. But there's this idea of, talk about next man forward, okay, that might work in a fire team, but it doesn't work in investigations and prosecutions.
Right. Yeah. Would they do that during a murder trial? Would you just change attorney? And
they will.
The 24th.
That's the problem. They do. So they have this view. All the services we call prosecutors and military trial counsel, and they have this view: trial counsel are fungible. And what they mean by that is, judge set the trial for the week that our prosecutor's in a different court. We'll just put somebody else in there. And there's no pushback as an institution. The same thing with the sex assault. Most victims who are going through the process will probably have 2 or 3 different prosecutors on their case by the time to get to trial. Well, it really matters to that victim that they're not continually telling the same story over and over. And, and it sends the message, well, we're not taking this seriously.
Right. And that sparks this question.
Right.
I'm driving on base, right? I'm in Camp Lejeune. I'm doing 5 miles over the speed limit, right? I get pulled over by an MP. I get a ticket from an MP. I go before the magistrate on base, and I pay my ticket. I do my thing, but it doesn't hit any part of my personal and private record, right?
Right.
My insurance doesn't go up. It doesn't ding my driver's license. I am pretty much like, oh man, okay, cool. I could do this again because there's no impact on me. I might lose my driving privileges if I do this 3 or 4 more times,
Right.
but I'm okay. I could do it. It's not a big problem for me. Is that the same thing that's happening with military assault? Like I can assault somebody, but this isn't going to hit my personal record. I don't have to. When I get kicked out of the military, I don't have to go register as a sexual offender in my hometown.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So supposed to be. So a court-martial conviction is a federal conviction. It's supposed to be reported to the FBI database. An offender is supposed to register. They have a registerable offense. But there's lots of people that fall below the radar. I don't know if you remember the Soda Springs massacre here in Texas, where Devin Kelly went in. It was November 5th, 2017, if I remember right. He went into his church in Texas and massacred 26 people. And then I think wounded another 10 or so. Well, Devin Kelly had been prosecuted in the Air Force for domestic abuse. Yeah. And my team actually prosecuted him. I was still active duty at that time. First, the senior leadership at that institute, at that base, didn't take Devin Kelly's crime seriously. He got a sweetheart pretrial agreement. Our sentencing process in the military is nuts. So the sentenced by a jury who knew nothing about this guy, didn't know how dangerous he was, gets slap on the wrist. And then the military doesn't tell the FBI about his conviction. And he's able to go out and buy a gun that he wasn't supposed to be able to go out, and he slaughters 26 people. And now the Air Force has lost a $250 million lawsuit. Even when we take somebody as serious as him, who held a gun to his loaded gun to his wife's head on several occasions, threatened to kill her, who abused his stepson and fractured his skull, he's not treated like a real criminal, like you would see in the civilian system. And so, it's a real problem. It's something Congress has looked at repeatedly. Representative Jackie Spear from California has been particularly concerned about sex offender registry and how it's happening and whether or not there's follow-up. But even after Devin Kelly killed all these people, the military's still not doing what should be 100% job of reporting convictions.
Yeah.
And so,
well, it's clearly based on the numbers, right? If 1 in 4 women are being assaulted in the military, right, and then 1 out of 15 men, I believe it is, and only 6.2% of those are being actually prosecuted in a trial setting.
Right.
That leads me to believe that 90% of these things are happening at the captain's mast level, at the command level, and it only gets a little documentation in my SRB or my service record book, right?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. And so I've talked about prosecution rates going down. So as you know, you can court-martial somebody, you can give them non-judicial punishment, captain's mast, Article 15, however you want to refer to that, or you can reprimand them, do some sort of administrative thing, kick them out.
Little EPD.
Right. And if you look back like to 2015, probably about, if the military did something to a sex offender, if they thought there was evidence to do something, probably about 70% of them started in the court-martial process. And the others were done Article 15 of reprimands. That's flipped. If you look at the most recent numbers, it's Article 15 is just as likely as going to court. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Article 15s don't show up in the outside world. It's Privacy Act protected. And so it does really raise a question of, are we sending sex offenders back into society.
Sure. Let's talk about even the command and control of that, right? Because here's the facts that I know is that in the military, I'm in control of my record book. I take my records with me everywhere I go, right? But I'm not controlling my medical records,
right?
Because that goes to another function. But with my record book, what's to keep me? I've already been captain. I've already been NJP. I've got an Article 15 in my record for sexual harassment, and I'm going to another unit. What's to say that I just don't rip that out of my book?
Yeah.
As I check into my new unit, right? Because I'm already an integrity violator,
right.
There's nothing keeping me to the honesty and the sanctity of the institution in which I'm serving.
Right. Yeah. And what's crazy is every service does things differently.
Yeah.
Like the Air Force has a database. I don't know what the Marines do, but even it's just like the Air Force. A reprimand is going to last in your record until you move.
Yeah.
And if you're an officer, it'll last for 4 years, if I remember right. Whereas the Army, if you get
like bad credit.
Yeah, you get
just jumps off.
Well, actually, the Army is insane because it depends what level the reprimand is. So if it's a general officer memorandum or reprimand, a GOMAR, those things never die, and they're just arbitrarily handed out. The more I work with the Army, the less impressed I am with the way they do discipline and So what is being told, and I talked about the sentencing process. So the military sentencing process, although there's been a lot of reforms to military justice, the military sentencing process right now is basically the same thing George Washington had. And so we have no modern sentencing tools. We can send somebody to jail, we can give them punitive discharge, we can make them do extra duties. We can strict them to base, military unique punishments, we could take some pay. But what we don't have is an ability to put restrictions on somebody once they get out of confinement. So if you look at a federal judge, they have the supervised release ability. So what they can say is, all right, you're going to go to jail for 5 years. And then you're going to be on supervised release for 20 more. Mm-hmm. And during that time, you're going to be doing sex offender treatment, anger management treatment. Your computer's going to be subject to no notice searches. You're going to have to put monitoring devices on your computer, like if you have child exploitation, child pornography. If you look at a military person who's convicted of child pornography, their sentence will be about 10% of or 20% of what they'd get in the federal system. And then the day they're released, there's under absolutely no restrictions. And so they can go right back to exploiting children through the internet because we don't have these abilities. So we need to modernize our justice system. The other thing is that like a federal judge, before he sentences somebody or she sentences somebody, gets what we call pre-sentencing report. And the probation office has done a deep dive into this person. They've looked at all their records, high school records, anything out there. And then they've also probably had a psychological evaluation. So going back to Devin Kelly, no one knew how dangerous this guy was because we don't have ability to do a psychological evaluation and give it to the judge to say, this guy needs help. Even though we knew, we didn't have the empirical evidence to show how dangerous he was.
Yeah. And it begs the question, it's like, I would like to know if the data exists, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But the likelihood of repeat offending is extraordinarily high. We know that to be fact, right? What data exists for those individuals that have committed these sexual crimes inside the military, get a slap on the hand, exited, and then what happens in the civilian world?
Yeah.
Like, are they doing the same thing? I would have to imagine, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's something I think that we need to start tracking.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, there's no ability to track, nor any interest by the Department of Defense to track.
Probably the interest, right?
Right.
Because the DOD has this great thing. It's called propaganda.
Yeah.
And they do a great job of it.
Yep, they do.
It's an incredible thing. Like these are, there are solutions to this problem, right? You just mentioned a few of them in terms of, how the federal system, creates these things that can be overlaid on top of the military system, right? That sounds like a very simple fix.
It is, and it's when I left the Air Force, it was to do this, was to push the change to our system. And we've got a lot changed over the last 10 years. One of the major changes was to remove prosecution authority from commanders, because unlike any other criminal justice system in this country, decision to prosecute is not made by a lawyer. It's made by an Air Force, most likely a pilot, infantry officer, surface warfare officer, all great at what they do, but they're not lawyers.
Right.
It'd be the same as me making medical decisions, not qualified to do it. And I don't care if I have a doctor giving me advice on where to cut, I'm still not performing surgery, and so that's, the military's pushback. So, well, they have a lawyer telling them what to do. Okay,
Sure.
well, they're still the one deciding.
Right.
And they can ignore what the lawyer says, and the lawyer worked for him, and it doesn't take a lot to figure out what the boss wants.
Sure.
And
sure. If it all goes wrong, the lawyer's the bag man.
Yeah, exactly. and the day you come into the Air Force J.A.G Corps, you're told your job is to find a way to say yes to the boss.
Yeah.
And so that's not independent advice, and you're giving the wrong person the ability to make these decisions.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time, again, like I said, to prosecute these cases, but also to understand the impact of trauma, counterintuitive behavior. So there's a lot of victim blaming that went on at that top level of generals making these decisions. Why was she there? What did she expect to happen? That kind of idea. We're not going to prosecute this guy because, she was intoxicated. So, what did she think was going to happen? All right. As a prosecutor, I've seen enough of these cases. I understand this. I'm going to make that independent decision. I don't care if the guy is a great guy. I don't care if he's a dirtbag. I'm going to look at the facts and apply those facts to the law. And if those facts and the law say this guy should be prosecuted, that's the decision I'm going to make.
Yeah.
All right. And so 11 serious offenses have been taken outside the chain of command, and now it's going to be that decision is going to be made by independent prosecutors, military prosecutors. That's good.
Yeah.
But we really just need to move the entire system. We have a perfect model. It's called the federal system. Just move it over, do what the feds do. One of the things we haven't talked about is we also have the only criminal justice system in this country that doesn't require unanimous verdicts.
Yeah.
And if you are an accused, you're like, what the hell? I got convicted, and everybody didn't have to agree. And in fact, I think some of them voted not guilty, and I'm still being convicted. Doesn't seem fair. If you're a victim, same thing. Wait a minute. Only 25% plus one of the court members had his vote not guilty, and he's not guilty. Whereas in the federal system or the state system, a verdict is unanimous, either guilty or not guilty. And so it doesn't engender faith, again, in this process if you don't have unanimous verdicts.
Yeah. I think I have one final question for you.
Sure.
This would be a good one. I think back to the Citadel and some of the rape and the things that was going on in the Citadel was at the late 90s. Right? I think about West Point. I think about Annapolis, right? Where all of these future officers are being trained to go in and lead young men and women. But when you pull back the curtain, a lot of those behaviors that we're talking about right now are occurring at those very institutions that are training our future officers of America. And this is the behavior that they're learning and that they find to be acceptable.
Right? Exactly, yeah. As bad as the sex assault numbers are on the active duty force, the highest rate of sexual assault and sexual harassment are at the service academies, all three of them. And so like sexual harassment for an average woman cadet at the Air Force Academy has a 1 in 2 chance of being sexually harassed each academic year. Sexual assault, rape, you're looking 14, 18% each academic year. Flip side of that is nobody's being punished. Nobody's being disenrolled. So the Air Force Air Force Academy went 5 years without achieving a conviction in a sex assault or rape case. 5 years. And at the same time, they have well over 100 cadets who are saying, I'm sexually assaulted or raped each year. And what does that mean? Well, what it means, if you look at the 3,000 or so officers are getting commissioned each year, hundreds of them are probably somebody who sexually assaulted somebody or sexually harassed somebody in their 4 years that they're at that academy. And the service academies have an outsized influence. You look at chiefs of staffs or the CNOs, they're most likely an Annapolis guy or a West Point guy or Force Academy guy. And so it really shouldn't be that much of a surprise that our leadership has sucked on this issue when so many of them came through a process that
Right.
basically was Animal House going back
Yeah,
to
encouraging it, right?
Right.
I would bet you that, here's a controversial statement. I would bet you that General Milley in his career has seen somebody sexually assault somebody else.
If you look at the stats, probably.
Probably, right? And I think, therein lies the problem.
Right.
Is, we see something, say something, but when it's our friends, it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
hey, guy,
Yep.
I'm just going to stop hanging out with you. Right? That's
If
about
they
as much as it
Yeah.
goes.
If they even do that, I mean, it's a real problem. Again, that teammate camaraderie is amazing. You've been in combat. I've never been in combat. I've never tried to portray myself as somebody who's been in combat. But how much you have to rely on the people on your left and right. But got to understand when they violate standards, it's just as if they violated the standards when they were standing next to you in the field.
100%. Because we are playing with lives.
Right.
However you want to cut it and slice it. That is the importance of the game in which we're playing. Don, I want to say thank you for all the work that you've done in addressing this issue over your years of service. You're an incredible human being, and I can only imagine the stories, the heartache, the sorrow that you've been a part of in prosecuting these things and holding people to the standard.
Yeah.
And that's we need more men and women like you in our service. Anything you'd like to share before we wrap this up?
Well, first, just thanks so much, Tim. Getting this message out to an audience that may not typically hear this is so important. I just, in sincere gratitude that you're taking the time doing this, taking the time to talk to other people who've been through this. It's incredible. I have a lot of optimism. I think we're going to get to a better place. As I said before, I think the people coming in younger are, if we don't screw it up, if leadership doesn't screw it up, it's going to take this better place. We're never going to have zero sexual assault. When I hear people say, our goal is zero, it's like, okay, that's like saying my goal is to be a trillionaire. It's never going to happen.
Right.
But we can reduce the numbers. We can make it a better place. And, it's a national security issue. Recruiting's down, retention's down. The RAND Corporation shows that about 10,000 people leave early every year because of this issue. We know that people aren't coming in because of this issue. So if you love your country, we need to get to a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's these conversations that hopefully can pull the shroud back and shine light on the areas that we need to be doing better.
Exactly.
So again, I thank you for your time. And that, my friends, will wrap up another episode of American Grit. Tough subjects, tough conversations here, but I think they are necessary and ones that we should be having at our home, ones that we should be having with our children and our peers. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Take care, and wash those stinking hands, and be kind to one another.